In a small village surrounded by mountains, there lived Pascual, an elderly farmer with hands weathered by work and a noble heart. His life was simple, his home a modest adobe house, and his greatest treasure, a small pen with chickens, a donkey, and a few goats. Despite his poverty, Pascual had the habit of sharing whatever little he had with those in need. One night, a group of thieves broke into his property and took his animals. At dawn, Pascual, with a heavy heart, went to the village seeking help, but his neighbors, who had once received his generosity, turned their backs on him. He returned to his home with sadness, but when he was about to lose hope, a stranger appeared at his door, hungry and tired. Without hesitation, Pascual offered him the last of what he had, a piece of bread and a little water. The stranger, after finishing his meal, looked at him with an expression of deep gratitude and said, "What you have given with love, God will return to you multiplied." Then, he disappeared into the horizon. The next day, Pascual woke with a sense of peace and, when he stepped outside, was left breathless. In his pen, where there had been nothing before, he found new chickens, goats, and even a strong, sturdy horse. Alongside them was a sack of coins sufficient to rebuild his home. Tears rolled down his face as he looked up at the sky. He understood that his generosity had been tested, and that, in the end, God never abandons those who give with their heart. The news of the miracle at Pascual's house spread quickly through the village. Some neighbors, skeptical, approached to see with their own eyes what had happened. Seeing the animals in the pen and the sack of coins by the door, they began to whisper among themselves. "This is impossible," one whispered. "Where did all this come from?" asked another, observing the chickens pecking the ground. Pascual, with a calm serenity, smiled at them and responded, "When we share with love, life returns to us abundantly." Many of those who had rejected him the day before felt ashamed. They had closed their doors to the old farmer when he needed them most. But he, instead, had opened his heart to a stranger without expecting anything in return. One of the men, a merchant from the village, lowered his gaze and murmured, "Pascual, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have refused you my help." The old man nodded with a compassionate smile. "I hold no grudges, son. I only hope this miracle reminds you that generosity is a seed that always blooms." That afternoon, as the sun set behind the mountains, Pascual sat on his porch and looked over his renewed farm. He knew something greater was at play, a lesson for all. The days passed, and Pascual carefully tended to the new animals that had appeared in his pen. Though he still did not fully understand the miracle, he felt a peace in his heart he had never known before. However, the story didn't end there. One morning, while feeding his chickens, he saw a young man in worn clothes and a tired face approaching. He had dirty hands and the slow gait of someone who had traveled a long distance. "Sir," said the young man in a weak voice, "my name is Tomás. I've been traveling for days and I have no place to stay. Could you give me some food and a place to rest?" Pascual looked at him silently for a moment. He remembered the betrayal of his neighbors and the pain he had felt when they shut their doors to him. But he also remembered the mysterious stranger who had told him, "What you have given with love, God will return to you multiplied." Without hesitation, Pascual nodded. "Son, my house is humble, but what I have, I share with you." Tomás sighed with relief and followed the old man to the table, where Pascual broke bread and served him some fresh milk. As they ate, Pascual noticed that the young man was trembling slightly, as though he feared something. "Where are you headed, son?" he asked curiously. The young man lowered his gaze. "I don't have a fixed destination. I've made mistakes, sir. People I should have helped, but I didn't. Now I carry that guilt, and I'm looking for redemption." Pascual listened attentively, feeling in his heart that this encounter was no accident. We all deserve a second chance, Tomás. Perhaps God brought you here to teach you something. The young man looked up, surprised by the old man's kindness. In his eyes, for the first time in a long time, a spark of hope shone. That night, the moon illuminated Pascual's small house as Tomás drank some water, his gaze fixed on the ground. There was something heavy in his heart, something he needed to confess. "Sir Pascual," he said with a trembling voice, "I don't deserve your kindness. If you knew who I really am, you wouldn't let me stay here." The old man looked at him calmly, with no trace of judgment on his face. "Son, we have all made mistakes, but God gives us the chance to change. What is it that torments you?" Tomás clenched his fists, his chest rising and falling with the weight of his conscience. Finally, with a lump in his throat, he confessed, I was part of the group that stole your animals." The silence that followed was overwhelming. Pascual blinked in surprise, but said nothing. Tomás continued, tears rolling down his cheeks. "I have no excuses. I joined those men out of need, out of hunger. But when I saw your pain after losing everything, I knew I had crossed a line. Since then, I have wandered without peace, seeking a way to make it right." Pascual sighed and lowered his gaze. He could feel the weight of Tomás's remorse in his words, the inner struggle he had lived through since that night. Finally, he stood up, leaning on his cane, and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "God teaches us to forgive, son. If your heart truly desires change, then you have a new beginning ahead of you." Tomás looked at him in disbelief. "You forgive me? If God blessed me when everything seemed lost, who am I to deny you the chance to do things right?" The young man broke into tears, kneeling before the old man. Never in his life had someone offered him mercy instead of punishment. "I will do whatever it takes to make amends, Sir Pascual." The old man smiled tenderly. "Then stay, son. Perhaps this is the place where God wants you to be." That night, Tomás slept with a lighter heart than ever before. The next morning, Tomás woke up with a feeling he hadn't remembered experiencing in a long time. Peace. The warmth of Pascual's home, the aroma of freshly baked bread, and the cool breeze coming through the window made him feel something he thought was lost: hope. When he went outside to the corral, he found Pascual feeding the animals with patience and dedication. The old man looked at him with a smile and handed him a sack of grain. "If you're going to stay, son, you'll need to learn the value of hard work." Tomás nodded eagerly. "I'll do whatever it takes, Mr. Pascual. I want to change. I want to learn." That day, the young man worked tirelessly. He repaired the old fence, cleaned the barn, and helped carry water from the well. With every task, he felt something inside him being rebuilt. It wasn't just physical work. It was a purification of his soul. At midday, Pascual called him to lunch under the shade of a tree. As they shared bread and cheese, the old man spoke serenely. "Life puts us to the test, son. It's not what we did yesterday that defines who we are, but what we decide to do today." Tomás pressed his lips together and nodded. "I don't want to go back to my old life. I want to be someone worthy, someone like you." Pascual smiled and patted him on the shoulder. "You don't need to be like me. You just need to be the best version of yourself." That afternoon, as the sun began to set behind the mountains, Tomás felt for the first time that he had found a home. Days passed, and Tomás became Pascual's right hand. He learned to plow the land, care for the animals, and, above all, appreciate the simple life of the countryside. Every night, as he lay down to sleep, he felt gratitude for the chance to redeem himself. However, the true test had not yet come. One afternoon, while Pascual and Tomás were gathering firewood near the forest, a group of men appeared on the path. Tomás felt a chill when he recognized them. They were the same men he had stolen with weeks earlier. "Well, well," one of them said with a mocking smile. "If it isn't our old friend Tomás, now playing at being a farmer." The young man swallowed hard, but before he could respond, Pascual stepped forward calmly. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The men laughed scornfully. "We've come for Tomás. We don't want him to forget who he really is." The young man felt the old life calling him again, but this time something inside him rebelled. "I'm not going back with you," he said firmly. "I found a new path." One of the men spat on the ground and took a step forward. "So now you think you're better than us? After everything we did together?" Tomás felt fear rise in his chest, but Pascual placed a hand on his shoulder. "Life gives second chances to those willing to take them," the old man said. "And Tomás has already taken his." The thieves exchanged mocking glances, but seeing the determination in the young man's eyes, they realized they had lost their influence over him. "You're wrong to betray your own," one of them said before leaving. Tomás watched them walk away and, for the first time, felt no fear. He looked at Pascual with gratitude. "If you hadn't taught me what true value is, I might have gone back with them." The old man smiled serenely. "Courage, son, is not the absence of fear, but the decision to do what is right despite it." Tomás nodded. He knew he still had much to learn, but one thing was certain. He would never go back to his old life. After the encounter with the thieves, Tomás worked even harder on the farm. He wanted to prove to Pascual and to himself that he had truly changed. He learned to harvest, care for the land, and treat the animals with patience and love. One day, while milking one of the cows, they saw a woman approaching with a small child in her arms. Her clothes were dirty, and her eyes reflected hunger and exhaustion. "Sorry to bother you," she said weakly. "My son and I haven't eaten in days. Do you have anything you could give us?" Tomás felt a pang in his chest. He remembered what Pascual had told him about sharing without expecting anything in return. Without hesitation, he took some bread and a container of milk and offered them to her. The woman took them with tears in her eyes. "God bless you truly," she whispered, hugging her son as she drank the milk eagerly. Pascual watched the scene with a smile and looked at Tomás with pride. "You've not only learned to work the land, son, but also to work on your heart." That night, while Tomás gazed at the stars from the porch, Pascual sat next to him. "Do you know what's most beautiful about giving?" the old man asked. Tomás shook his head. "When you give with the heart, life returns it to you in ways you can't imagine." The young man smiled and looked up at the sky. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was on the right path. The next morning, Tomás woke up with renewed energy. The sun shone over the fields, and the fresh air carried the scent of freshly cut wheat. He felt different, stronger, as if every day on the farm reinforced his purpose. While he was collecting water from the well, he saw Pascual sitting on an old wooden chair, looking at the horizon with a peaceful expression. The old man waved him over. "Come, son. I want to talk to you." Tomás set the bucket aside and approached. "Tell me, Mr. Pascual." The old man looked at him with eyes full of wisdom. "You've worked hard, you've learned to care for this land, and you've opened your heart to generosity. But there's something else I want you to understand." Tomás frowned in curiosity. "What is it, sir?" Pascual smiled. "This farm, I want it to be yours." Tomás felt his heart stop. "What? But I can't accept something like that." The old man nodded calmly. "Of course you can. I have no family, and I see in you a son that life has brought me. Someone who knows what it's like to lose, but also what it's like to rebuild." The young man felt tears burning in his eyes. No one had ever given him an opportunity like that. I don't know what to say. Pascual gave him a pat on the shoulder. Just promise me that you'll keep working with the same noble heart you've shown. Tomás nodded firmly. I promise. As the sun continued to rise, Tomás understood that the true blessing wasn't the land, nor the animals, but the love and trust Pascual had placed in him. Days passed, and Tomás worked harder than ever. The farm no longer just belonged to Pascual. Now he also had a responsibility over it. He took care of every corner with dedication, ensuring that everything thrived. But one day, when everything seemed to be in harmony, Pascual fell ill. His body, worn down by the years, no longer had the same strength. Tomás found him in bed, his face pale and his breath labored. Mr. Pascual, I'll go to the village for a doctor, he said urgently. But the old man shook his head and took his hand. No, son, my time here is coming to an end. Tomás felt a lump in his throat. Don't say that. You're going to be fine. Pascual smiled weakly. Life follows its course, Tomás. There's no need to fear what's coming. Just trust in God. The young man pressed his lips together, trying to hold back the tears. I don't know what I'll do without you. The old man sighed. You do know, because I've taught you to walk in faith, to work with love, and to give without expecting anything in return. You don't need me here to remind you of that. Tomás felt his heart break, but he also understood the truth in those words. Pascual had given him everything. A home, a new life, a second chance. Now it was his turn to carry on that legacy. That night, as the moon lit up the small house, Tomás stayed by Pascual's side, holding his hand. The old man closed his eyes with a peaceful smile. I'm proud of you, son. And with that last phrase, Pascual exhaled his final breath. Dawn arrived with a sky tinged in golden and orange hues. Tomás stepped out onto the porch with red eyes from crying, but with a firm heart. Pascual was gone, but his presence was still felt in every corner of the farm, in the sound of the chickens, in the wind that caressed the fields, in the warmth of the home he had built with love. That morning, the village neighbors began to arrive silently. Many came with remorse on their faces, remembering how they had ignored the old man when he needed them most. A woman left a basket with freshly baked bread. A man brought a sack of grain, and another offered to help on the farm. Tomás watched them calmly. Pascual never held a grudge, he said. He always believed in the power of generosity. If you really want to honor his memory, don't do it with gifts. Do it by helping one another. The villagers looked at each other, moved. From that day on, the village changed. It became a place where people supported each other, where no one went hungry or cold without someone reaching out a hand. As for Tomás, he stayed on the farm, fulfilling the promise he had made to Pascual. He worked the land, helped those in need, and taught others the most valuable lesson he had learned. When you give with the heart, life always returns it to you multiplied. And so, Pascual's legacy didn't die with him. It blossomed in every act of kindness, in every abundant harvest, in every heart that learned to share without expecting anything in return.